Municipal Attorney. John Weddleton, Assembly.
Patrick Flynn.
Bill Evans.
Chris Cruz, Treasury Supervisor.
Dan Warren, Treasury.
Lee Peterson, Assembly.
Shelby Brand Johnson.
Victoria Zumba.
Julia Tucker, Assembly Council. And the audience, please state your name.
Dean Gates, Assistant Municipal Attorney.
Andy Honest, Municipal Clerk's Office, Business License.
Erica McConnell, Office of Economic and Community Development. Asha Hotch. Shirley Nelson, Chair of the Budget Advisory Commission.
Rose Foley, Assembly Budget Analyst.
Barbara Chung, Municipal Clerk. Thank you. I believe Mr. Moore is going to do the presentation for us at this time. Mr. Moore, you have the floor.
Okay, so thanks. I'm gonna say a few remarks, and then I'm gonna actually pass it over to Bliss, so she can get the experience of being a main presenter. So,
Mr. Clerk,
yes.
Mr. Trainee has a question.
Dan,
Sure, yes.
does this 49 conform to 49S?
Yes, our presentation today will highlight the sort of the fundamental part of the ordinance, which was in the original and carried forward into the S version. And then last couple pages, we actually focus on what's in the S version. And the S version is the one that we're going to ask that you approve on Tuesday night. So,
I just wanted to make sure.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee.
Okay, so just for introduction, Bliss and I are both obviously from Treasury, and Treasury is involved with pretty much these types of taxes. What the voters approved by pretty high margin was retail sales tax on marijuana and marijuana products. And so today, we wanted to just walk you through some of the highlights of the ordinance, because there's lots of parts to marijuana, but for the sales tax part, we have to create a new chapter in the code that will spell out all the laws and rules that we will enforce and the industry will need to follow. And what we did, and Bliss will go through this, is we modeled it after a lot of other chapters that we have that are similar type taxes. But we also looked, because this is marijuana, it's specialized and it's going to be heavily regulated at the state level, we looked a lot to the state law and to regulations. And Dean Gates was our assigned attorney. He was very helpful in making sure we had very precise language. And of course, Bill Falsey also was definitely part of that. So our goal today is just to give you hopefully a decent understanding of the ordinance, and then take any questions. Assemblymember Weddleton actually did have some questions ahead of time. We responded to those last week, and that actually triggered the S version. There were some points that he caught that we didn't really see when we first, even though we put a lot of time into this, we didn't see it, and so we did clean it up and tighten some of the language. So we'll go over that, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Bliss. Bliss is a supervisor of the group that basically will administer this new tax. She has a number of auditors underneath her, and so she gets sort of the long-term duty here of taking care of it. So this is very important, this ordinance. This establishes the rules which we then operate off of when we develop forms, our database. Everything is based on this. This is truly the foundation for the tax side of it. Okay, so go ahead, Bliss. You're up.
Okay, thank you. So if you want to turn to slide 2, a lot of this is what Dan just talked about, but I did want to mention that, as he was saying, there are several provisions that are similar to other MOA tax codes, so they're tested processes, and some of those are financial guarantee requirements, the registration process, record keeping, the penalty structure, and also remedies and appeals processes through the hearing officer. So moving on to slide 3, just to highlight a couple of the main points of enforcement of this type of business under this ordinance. We have an alternative method for the fiduciary guarantee requirement, and that's mainly because at this time financial institutions are not allowing marijuana businesses to open bank accounts. So our methods of guarantee, they are a surety bond, a deposit in escrow, or a letter of credit. And since that's not really offered to the registered business, which is what we require under other tax codes, we put a provision in to allow the responsible party for a retailer to provide a personal guarantee or personally provide those particular methods of security.
I'm going to just chime in just for a second. The reason why this is the subject here is because we're talking about a tax that is collected on behalf of the municipality, in the name of the municipality, by businesses. And we've seen with rental car agencies and with hotels that there are some sort of bad seeds out there that end up collecting the money and they don't pass it back on to us like they're supposed to. They use it to remodel their facilities or enhance their profits, or basically kind of can become a bank to them. So we're trying to make sure that if they don't pay us, we can pay ourselves with this financial guarantee. And so there would be some type of a initial, guaranteed deposit in some different form, which would be out there. And if we saw that they did not pay over a period of months, or however long, 3-6 months, we actually can go grab the money ourselves, pay ourselves, and we don't have to chase money that maybe has already been spent on other purposes. So,
Mr. Moore, I have a question.
Yes.
And then Mr. Peterson. So how does that work if they don't pay? Because I remember the tobacco tax issue, and they didn't pay, and they went to court, and they went to jail, and had to give us a lot of money.
right. The tobacco is different because it's not a sales tax. So it's an excise tax. So room tax and rental car tax are sales tax. They're based on the transaction.
Right.
And but tobacco tax is based on the quantity of the product coming into the city, and that actually is tax collected by the distributors, the real big guys. So a Costco and Sam's, places like that. So it's a whole different model. These are individual businesses that we're each hoping that they are responsible and honest and basically being our agent and collecting the tax. And there's sometimes there's incentive to not pass it back on to us.
And there are consequences if they don't, correct?
Correct.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. There's some penalties, and then we would exercise on this guarantee, and we would actually revoke their license to operate from that point forward until they reestablish the bonds.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so, we're requiring them to have an escrow deposit or a personal guarantee or surety bond. Do we require that of some of the car rental agencies
We
and
do.
hotels as well?
We have it's a standard. It's not that they have to be on it forever. They just have to prove that they are good, responsible businesses. So, like I can tell you for a hotel, and I think it might be the same for car rental, if they had 8 consecutive quarters, and they call it quarterly, we're talking monthly here, but if they have 8 consecutive quarters of good, responsible payment, then they could write us and say, we want to be released from this guarantee, and we release them. We give them back the escrow money, or we release the bond. So we don't. It's not an owner's thing. It's forever. It's just they need to prove themselves first, and then we go from there.
If I can follow up just a little bit. Thank you. So if a marijuana business had gone a year and had been paying their taxes regularly on time,
Right.
then they could ask to be released or something?
I believe it's 2 years.
Yeah, for this, most all our code is 2 years. So yeah.
So it's actually consecutive payments, so this
Yeah.
would be 24 consecutive payments. So we have designed it where they pay monthly, so it'd be 24 consecutive months of compliance.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Training?
Dan, you referred to the retailers earlier as our agents. Since they're gonna be our agents, are we gonna compensate them for collecting tax?
We don't have that provision in here, and we don't have that in the other code chapters either. Our requirement is that they use standard like cash registers to record things. When it comes to reporting and paying, it's going to be a pretty simple 1-page form, and it's not going to be really onerous for them to track this. They do need to do some upfront programming. That would be sort of a one-time cost. But after that, it's mainly just transcribing information off of their cash registers.
Would you do me a favor then, just take a look at some system that compensates our agents for collecting our tax.
Okay.
I don't need it right now, but I'm just thinking, as this grows, if it's going to affect our agents, we need to compensate them.
I can say, and for the other industry, especially for a room tax, we actually don't require them to pay except quarterly. So they actually get the use of the money for a quarter, and that there's a sort of a compensation factor there. But yeah, we'll look into it. So
The reason for me asking is because there's been some talk about having a general sales tax. If you're going to do that, then you've got to recompense the agents for collecting that.
right.
And this gets
Yeah, I think
started
that's more
on that
common with the
way.
general sales tax. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Training? Mr. Flynn?
Yeah, I'm curious, the dichotomy between our other sales taxes, where we collect quarterly and monthly here. Is there a particular reason to do it monthly as opposed to quarterly?
There is. Do you want to?
Oh, cool.
Okay. So one of the reasons we decided to do that is it's an unknown industry. It's a cash-based business. So since they are, as Dan was explaining, they're collecting money on the city's behalf, we're trying to minimize the amount of time that cash is being retained by the retailer. And then also for when they come into City Hall to make their tax payments, we're also reducing the amount of cash that's coming on site at one given time.
Yeah, if they paid quarterly, they'd be bringing in
Mhm.
3 times the amount of cash, which we kind of don't want to do.
Right.
The other thing is with tobacco, even though it is an excise tax, tobacco is on a monthly filing basis, so there's similarity there. So.
Follow up on that?
Certainly, Mr.
So, if there is an electronic way of accepting payments that is generally adopted, not necessarily through, everyone will take the same one, various electronic forms of accepting payment, would it make more sense to move to a quarterly basis?
I think, you know, because it is a new industry and we don't really have a good feel for it, it seems like we're better off in the beginning at least, maybe going monthly. If down the road we wanted to switch to quarterly, we could, but I think we really need to know what kind of, we do see some real differences between, let's say, rental car industry and hotel. There's more problems in rental car, and the more there's sort of small businesses, there's just some more risk there. So, you know, it reduces our risk if it's monthly and not waiting quarterly. And we're able to revoke certificates sooner too if we see issues. So,
Thank you, Mr. Morris. Mr. Evans?
Yeah, just responding to Mr. Trina's, the sales tax that will be proposed does have a provision that would compensate retailers and those who have to collect the tax for the administrative costs.
It would be nice, Mr. Evans, if they could start working on that too, so.
Yeah, no, actually, they can't work on it apparently. We're gonna have to outsource the analysis. I mean, the resources at Treasury will not permit them to do so. I don't think the form.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Trainer, please continue.
okay.
Great, so moving down to the next part of that particular page, number 3, we've talked about a little bit already of the audit and enforcement of a cash-based business and how there's some unique concerns there and challenges. The requirement in the state's regulations for the use of a tracking system does help us because it means that there's an associated transaction in the retailer's sales system. So it will help when my auditors go out to do their audits to be able to do a detailed reconciliation between the inventory system that they're required to use as well as the sales and the tax collection side and be able to match those up. Additionally, we have a provision to require annual recertification with Treasury, and that's also consistent with the state's requirements where there are annual renewal processes, and as part of Treasury's process, we'll require a copy of their renewed license with the state. So if we'd like to move on to slide 4. The records requirements under this ordinance they contain the same basic info that we're requiring in our other tax codes. So some of that is consumer sales data, the date of sale, type and quantity of in this particular one, it's marijuana or marijuana products sold. Then we have the sales price, amount of retail sales tax due, an amount and method of payment received. And that will help us when we're doing our audits to make sure we can track these transactions and make sure that the sales tax was assessed, collected, and remitted accurately. There's also the inventory records, as I just mentioned, and acquisition data. And we've starred the elements that are consistent with the state's regulations. So the ones that don't have a star are more related to taxation, and the Department of Revenue on their marijuana webpage have not published any draft regulations yet, but we anticipate that we will be consistent because our other tax codes are very consistent with the state. Okay, moving on to page 5. This slide really lists the prohibited acts under the ordinance. We've also starred the ones that are in the state regulations, and again, because the Department of Revenue Taxation Group has not published their regulations, we didn't star those, but we again expect consistency just like our other tax codes. Moving to the next page. This is where we get into talking about the changes between the original ordinance and the S version. The versions are very much the same. we really had technical corrections versus substantive changes. And again, I'd like to thank Assemblymember Weddleton for his valuable feedback. One of the things we did, we simplified the terms we were using associated with a retailer. So in the original version, we were using words such as applicant retailer and applicant, and then also retailer. So we simplified that. We're ensuring consistent use of retailer. And where appropriate, we also clarified the responsible party role, which is a defined term in the ordinance, and we're using retailer or responsible party for the retailer as appropriate in the particular section. And this is also consistent with our room tax and our rental vehicle tax codes. We also addressed the unused inventory of unregistered retailers, which was a provision in our previous version. And an unregistered retailer would be if their certificate with Treasury had expired or was suspended or revoked as part of enforcement. The state regulation actually addresses the disposition of inventory. So we changed our provision so that it allows the state's regulations to continue to govern. And then what we would do in a situation, if we had that occur, we would continue reaching out to our counterparts at the State of Alaska Department of Revenue and the Tax Division. We actually have an existing MOU for information sharing, and so we would be able to talk with them if those situations did come up. And the last page is continued changes of the S version. We had a provision in the prohibited acts that talked about retailer to retailer transactions. And instead of trying to call that out specifically in the ordinance, we again deferred to state law, which controls. And Alaska Statute 17.38 addresses the 6 lawful operations of marijuana retailers. And retailer to retailer transactions are not listed as an authorized act. So we're allowing that to control. And the final provision that we actually just removed, it was a prohibition on selling marijuana or marijuana products at less than cost. And we fully removed that, and again, we're allowing the state regulations to govern the disposition of unsold inventory. So that covers all of the changes in the.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Any questions from anybody? Mr. Evans?
Yeah, this came up a while back in one of our meetings, and maybe it's a question for Mr. Falsey, but with respect to the black market that will presumably continue to operate for some time, is there, other than the current laws that prohibit sale of marijuana, once we put this regulatory system in place, if somebody is found to have been out in the black market selling marijuana, is there any recourse that the municipality have or the state would have that they're basically also sort of operating as an unlicensed vendor and responsible for back taxes and things like that? There would be another avenue other than criminal that you could go after them.
Through Chair, I think I'll solicit the input of Dean or Dan, but as I'm looking back over this, I think there may well be a way to say that those are still taxable sales, but let me confirm that with the rest of the board.
If I would add, I agree with Mr. Fossey. They're taxable sales, they're retail sales, and the offense is that we make the auto license a certificate of registration from Treasury. So that would be something that we could address in civil court as well, collecting new taxes that would be owed for retail sales. And how to use proving that retail sales occurred, since there would be no inventory tracking system and so forth. But it's something you could address in terms of getting them to stop from not just the criminal side, the suicide, operating without certificate of registration. We've seen that come up in the past, I think, motor vehicle rental sales.
Thank you, Mr. Gage. Mr. Evans?
Yeah, and I can follow up. Is there any sort of civil penalty or an amount that either is currently in there or couldn't be added to someone who is selling marijuana without license that is a significant penalty of, $1,000, $5,000, something that would be a big impediment to them?
So through the chair, on page 20, there's a section of tax avoidance and civil fraud, and that includes folks who are not filing the required reports of their sales. So to pick out where we actually define the magnitude of that penalty.
There, I think on page 24, it does address types of penal civil fraud.
That's right.
200% of the deficiency due or $500, whichever is greater. So it could be pretty stiff.
$500 every time.
Yeah. Sure.
There's no way to prove anything else.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Anything else, Mr. Evans?
No, thank you.
Any other questions from anybody or comments from Mr. Gates or anybody else before we entertain it?
Mr. Moore, when do you want this to pass the assembly?
Okay, thanks. We had put it on, as soon as that vote happened, we were submitting our draft ordinance to law because our goal was to try to have these rules, which are important to the industry, out there before it actually truly goes live. We totally understand there's, I think 2 or 3 dozen applicants right now for Anchorage, and that it's going to take a while before they're actually opening their doors. However, for us, we have a very long lead time because we have to have a database that we're going to procure that's going to be specially programmed to model after these rules. That's going to take 3 to 5 months for us to find the vendor, to write the rules, design, test, and go live. So when those doors actually really do open, we want to have our system in place, ready to go. And so for us, it's important to get it done in May. And May 10th was your other meeting. May 24th, I think, is the next one.
Mhm.
And I think that's the day it goes live. That is, legalized sales are technically legal. So we were pushing to try to have it done by May 10th. And we think the sooner it gets approved, the sooner we can start with database selection design, forms, our website. We did post this on the website for the last couple weeks. So we've tried to let the world know about this. We haven't heard anything from industry. Senator Weddleton did have a good set of questions for us. This work session, I think, is really helpful. But I think at this stage, I think this is really in good shape. It's a good foundation. We know that the industry is sort of a mystery. We don't all have a lot of experience with it. So we fully intend to take notes and over time and to come back down the road with some modifications once we understand better what it means to deal with the industry and enforce things. And so this is our starting point. A year from now, we could come back with another ordinance that kind of clarifies even more once we have some experience. So.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Weddleton?
Thanks. So when you set up your system for tracking this sales tax, would that be applicable to a broader sales tax?
We're hoping to use a vendor that actually has the capability of doing different modules, different types of taxes. So it could be a general sales tax, it could be a marijuana tax, it could be room tax, rental vehicle. It's something where we would like it to have the ability to grow and not just be only marijuana. So that's our hope.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Any other questions?
Just a real question.
Mr. Quinn?
You email this to us?
Sure.
Okay.
Great. Anybody else have Mr. Houston?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Technically, you said it would be legal on May 24th with the retailers, but the Marijuana Control Board hasn't even sent out any licenses for growers to even begin growing yet. So I don't believe there's going to be any. It wouldn't be legal for any retailers to open up in May because there wouldn't be any legal product for them to sell.
That's correct.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Trainee?
Mr. Bowles, I saw one you sent out recently for an event that's going on with the 9 to 7, the 14th and 15th.
It's not clear from the chair. It's not clear whether that event is actually going to take place in the United States.
Your website now says tonight.
Okay.
If it is in fact going to go into effect, what I could really want to do violates many portions of this. So are we planning on having law enforcement there to make sure that the law is not violated relative to the use of cannabis?
So through the chair, for background, that there is an event being advertised by the Alaska Cannabis Institute, a San Diego outfit. We had an event last year. They're on this one, the Northwest Cannabis Classic. Their website has for some time advertised both that you will be able to enjoy and taste various marijuana samples at pop-up lounges
And judge
at the
them.
Denina Center, and that in exchange for payment of a $350 judge's fee, you too would be invited to judge the first ever Northwest Cannabis Classic competition to be provided with 16 ounce marijuana. It sent in a letter inviting them both an on-site consumption and constructive sale of marijuana, where both legal and lawful, and should stop advertising what was going to happen in the Denina Center. I subsequently did talk to Greg Stokes, the SMG general manager of the Denina Center. He had also been in communications with the event organizer, reiterated that message. I suspect he would have security. He fully intends to police those activities, and if things start to go awry, he did indicate to me that he would not be opposed to saying we're shutting it down.
Thank you, sir. I appreciated your response on that.
Thank you, Mr. Folsey, thank you, Mr. Training. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. What date did you say that the Cannabis Classic is
Next
going
Saturday
on?
and Sunday.
This weekend? Next week?
The following.
Where's the 15th?
Okay.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Mr. Peterson. I don't see anyone else. I want to thank you for the presentation, and also thank my colleagues for being here this morning. Work session is adjourned.